Welcome back to Jersey Matters. I'm Larry Menti. How has the Me Too movement affected sexual harassment in New Jersey workplaces? And exactly how close is the Bob Hugin and Bob Menendez Senate race? We're going to talk about those two issues with Krista Jenkins, the director at the Fairleigh Dickinson University poll. Thanks so much for being here.
Happy to be here, thanks.
Let's start with Me Too. We're right in the middle of the Me Too movement. It came to a head again during the Kavanaugh hearings. So you have all this publicity about sexual harassment. You have all this activity about sexual assault. You did a poll about in New Jersey workplaces. How has all that publicity affected the workplace?
Sure. So we have been working with Taft Communications for the past few years to track questions of diversity in the workplace, in addition to questions of sexual harassment and matters like that. And so our sample was New Jersey working adults. And the theory was that given everything that we have experienced over the past year, that we would have seen somewhat of a change, perhaps, in self-reported instances of sexual harassment in the workplace. Either it would have gone up because people are recognizing it more and therefore likely to call it out more, or perhaps behavior would have changed and people would have seen a decrease in the incidence. And we didn't. We really didn't see much in the way of a movement in the needle, so to speak, in regard to cases of sexual harassment or, just bad behavior in the workplace that people would report.
So with all the noise, I saw both men and women said about the same thing.
Correct. Yeah.
That nothing's changed.
That's right. That's right.
However, the number of people that said they've been sexually harassed it changed depending on age.
It did, and I think that's largely a consequence of again, the normalcy, I think, now of people acknowledging that it happens and being willing to say that, in fact, it did. So if what the Me Too movement did, among other things, is, identify essentially what sexual harassment is, I think it might have normalized the ability for people to come forward and claim that it was something that happened to them.
But it is fascinating that overall you have all this noise, all this talk about Me Too, people being tried, people going to jail, people losing their jobs,
Sure.
and yet it seems to have no effect when it comes to the workplace.
Well, it's not that it's no effect, it's that people are not, there doesn't appear to be a change in the perception that it is happening in the workplace. I guess that's the takeaway from that.
All right, let's move from that to Bob Hugin,
Sure.
Bob Menendez. And it's interesting when you hear about all the Senate races around the country, this one doesn't get as much coverage, and yet, according to your poll, it's getting tight.
It is getting tight. We have Senator Menendez up by 6 percentage points among likely voters, 5 percentage points among Republican voters. And it is a tight race, and I think this is not what you would expect from an incumbent senator. Other polls have it a little bit tighter, a little bit wider. I mean, it really depends, I think, on who you're looking at. But they're all telling the same story, basically. Once you account for the margin of error in these likely voter models, you end up with a race that is certainly leaning in Bob Menendez's direction, but it is certainly not the large difference that you might expect, given the fact that he has been a longtime public servant, tremendous name recognition, tremendous fundraising ability, and a preponderance of Democrats in the state.
Yeah, no, that's why it's the big surprise. You talked about some of the other polls. There was a recent poll that got a lot of publicity out from Stockton University because it had the race within 2 points. And
Right.
I think people at that point were saying, wait a second, is this an outlier? Is it not really that close? Or when you put all the polls together, is it getting that close?
Well, I don't know if it's at a 2 percentage point difference. Again, you have to account for the margin of error. I don't quite know what their margin of error was in their profile. But again, I think the takeaway is that it is certainly a closer race than you would expect. Whether it be 2 points or 6 points or 8 points, whatever the current estimate is, it is very close. And the takeaway from our poll, however, is that when we asked our question, we allowed people to still claim a level of indecision at this point. And what we found is that among Democrats, 22% of self-identified Democrats still claim to be undecided. That is a large percentage of the Democratic electorate who still are unsure as to whom to support, whether it be the relative unknown, Bob Hugin, or the longtime, Senator, Bob Menendez. So I think that's probably good news for Bob Menendez because he has the ability to capture people whose partisan leanings are certainly pushing them in his direction. But it
Was
is
that the
unusual.
largest group of undecided among Democrats, or where were independents and Republicans?
Sure. Well, independents are a little bit higher, which is what you would expect, because the independents in our poll are the true independents. That is to say, these are people who on the initial party ID question, party identification question, they say that they don't lean in either direction. So these are the true people who really are fence sitters. So you would expect them to be more indecisive relative to Democrats and Republicans. The Republican level of indecision, however, is at 6%. So you have 22% of Democrats, 6% of Republicans.
Did some of the people that, especially the Democrats that were undecided, did they say why they're undecided? Did they say why they don't like Bob Menendez?
No, we didn't ask that question, but we did follow up with questions about favorability ratings and the extent to which people have favorable and unfavorable opinions of both candidates. And what we found is that what we found before about Senator Menendez, that he is upside down in regard to his popularity in the state. That is, there are more people who have unfavorable opinions of him than favorable opinions. And to the point that I raised earlier about the potential difficulty he's having with his Democratic base, a third of Democrats have an unfavorable opinion of their senator. So it's not great for him. But again, from political science research, we know that for the most part, when you cast a vote, it really is your partisan leanings that will push you in a direction of a candidate, particularly if you're undecided.
You hear a lot now, especially because of the last presidential election, that the polls aren't as good as they used to be, that people aren't answering the questions truthfully. Are you finding that?
I'm going to be I know that the polling industry has certainly taken a beating, and there are certainly issues going on within the industry in terms of declining response rates, use of cell phones, et cetera. But they are still, by and large, very good portraits of what the American public is thinking and doing. And the evidence that I can bring to bear on that point is if you look at all of the polls that were done in the days prior to the last presidential election, I believe if you aggregate them, they were off by no more than a point relative to the actual outcome. So yes, there are certainly problems, but I have not seen anything that suggests that the totality of the polling industry needs to be called into question and we can no longer trust good quality data.
Yeah, and it's amazing. The same people that say the polls, you can't look at the polls, or will quote the polls if it goes in their favor.
That's true. That's true. Absolutely.
It seems to happen that way all the time. Thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate it.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Krista Jenkins is the director at the Fairleigh Dickinson University poll. Jersey Matters continues right after this. Coming up next, surprising statistics on the number of children who are malnourished in New Jersey. That's when Jersey Matters continues.